Ed Davis is a multi-faceted B2B communications executive with a proven track record in leading international organizations focused in brand, marketing and sales campaigns to drive revenue growth and market share. And our own Nikos Lemanis is a senior marketing professional with over 17 years of experience in cross-industry marketing consultancy, cross-channel digital marketing and content creation. Ed and Nikos, the platform is yours.
Okay, hello from Texas, everyone. My name is Nikos Lemanis. I'm Strategy Director here in Luxid in the USA. I'm joined today by Ed Davis, Director of International Client Relationships at BBN. And we're going to be offering a little insight and some tips about doing business in the USA. Hello, Ed. Thank you for joining us today.
Hey, Nikos. Happy to be here.
Good to see you. So, Ed, we could probably talk all day about this, our combined thoughts and experience, but I think we're going to focus on two areas. Firstly, business culture, how it differs here in the US compared with Europe, and then take a look at some of the shorter and longer term trends that affect doing business here in the USA. So first of all, there's some huge differences, I think it's fair to say, between the way business is done here in the USA and in Europe. And contrasting cultures and attitudes go a long way to explaining this. And you're in a pretty unique position of being a collaborator, an ally, and enabler of people and businesses on both sides of the Atlantic. So maybe you could give us a few truths about working with American clients that might help us create better relationships and do business more effectively.
Yeah, I'm happy to. I like the term enabler, of course. I think there's always going to be degrees within all of this, and you can never, it's wrong to use a really broad brush and say, oh, all Finns are like this, and everybody from London is like that, and all Americans are like that. But we'll attempt to do that a little bit here. I think there are a handful of areas that I think are very distinct in the U.S. in terms of how we do them or our mindset about them versus other people from other parts of the world. And I'll start with the big one, which is communication. As you know, there's been a ton of books written on this. Richard Lewis has a famous one, When Cultures Collide. My favorite saying is, America and England are two countries separated by a common language. So, we are very different in the way that we communicate. I think some practical examples of that is silence for us means you're in agreement and an alignment, right? Silence in Finland means we're thinking about what our actual response is going to be, right? And I can appreciate that. I think sometimes Europeans try to avoid tackling an issue or question head on. They sort of come about it contemplatively and things along those lines. Americans were gung-ho, straightforward, and we'll talk another facet about that here in just a minute. I think another thing that defines Americans more so than most people, at least as a culture, we seemingly are ultra competitive in just about everything, whether it's I can eat that steak in an hour to, I beat that person off the line at the stoplight. Like, it's just a weird thing that's been ingrained in our culture that I don't see too many other places. I think another thing that we think about or sort of that defines us, we're in a hurry. Americans are in a hurry, right? And we do everything in short time frames. Look, Silicon Valley came up with sprints, right? Because we need to hurry up and build this business or build this product or build the life cycle of something. So, I think that is a moniker and a hallmark of the American mindset. We are very much driven by short-term goals, although, there's a long-term implication to all of that. But we are very hyper-focused on the now and what's happening tomorrow, what's happening next week. We don't really care too much about what's happening in 2 or 3 years from now. We just don't have that mindset. Another one that I find personally a bit comical, and we've talked about this before, my day being an international client services person typically starts somewhere in the neighborhood of 5:30, 6 a.m., goes to 9, 10 o'clock at night. And it always makes me chuckle when I get on a call with somebody from Europe at 7:30, 8 o'clock in the morning. They go, "Oh, thank you so much for getting on this early call. You must have, well, no, I've been up for a couple hours now, and I'm not the lazy American," which is a whole other conversation that we could have, I suppose. The other part of that in terms of working hours, right? We don't define our working day by 9 to 5. And I know a lot of European countries, a lot of European companies, that's it. And I actually admire that. I also find it really awesome that, in the Nordic countries, there's literally a whole month where the country pretty much takes off. And I love that. I know I can't get a hold of Timo when it comes to late July. Like, he's just gone, and that's great. I wish we did more of that. I wish I did more of that. If I ever took a vacation longer than a week, I was probably fired or laid off. I don't know. I think just two more things that I'd highlight for us. Seemingly, and it's great that other parts of the world do this, everybody likes to pay attention to the politics, or at least the presidential politics that happens in the US. But as American business people, we are actually taught there's two things you don't really talk about at work: politics and religion. They're two hot button issues. You don't know where anybody stands, and you just have people. It's very polarizing. It's that way in other parts of the world, but for whatever reason, it's magnified here in the US. And then lastly, I think, I talked about the communication at the top. I think the other thing that really defines Americans and American business culture is risk takers. And we've talked about it, Nikos. It starts with the way that this country was born, right? It was a risk for somebody to get on a ship and sail and end up here. And then, it's great open spaces. There's lots of opportunity and all that kind of stuff. And it just enables people to throw caution to the wind and take a risk. And we're very comfortable in that. We don't mind. We're competitive, but we don't mind losing. We're risk takers, and we don't mind losing at all, right? Because we know that we're going to get the opportunity to do it again. And so I think, those 6 things. Also, as Nikos talked about, we could literally talk about this for a couple of days, which is why we're going to do a 3-part podcast.
We'll do that for sure.
But Nikos, you, Luxid, you're the epitome of what it is that I've been saying, right? In terms of these 6 things that I've been talking about that are hallmarks of U.S. business culture. Am I telling everybody a lie? What's been your impression since you've been over here?
I think the business going international is going to face the same challenges or similar challenges, regardless of whether you're a multi-million pound enterprise coming from Europe and expanding into a different market, or a relatively small business as we are, looking to kind of get feet on the ground, get an impact in the new market. And everything you've said is absolutely true. I mean, we had a slight head start in a lot of ways. We've been working with US clients, US stakeholders for many years at Luxid, even before we had our most recent physical office here. Personally, I've been working mainly with US business for the last 10 years or so of my career. So, but still, we had to come with a plan. We knew how we wanted to land here. We knew how we were going to solidify and grow a presence here. We knew the kind of work we needed to get to target to meet that growth. And all of that was really based on research, based on experience, but more than anything, it was based on insight brought through established partnerships in the region, people and businesses that were already very structured, had a very structured presence here and a lot of experience here, and that was really key. It kind of brings me to the first point that I think we wanted to talk about here, which was expanding into a new part market. It's a challenge that works both ways. European businesses coming to the US, but also US businesses coming into Europe. You've got to be aware that opening a new office in a new country doesn't make you an international business. That's not how it works, unfortunately. You've got to be ready to decode those cultural nuances, like the ones you've already talked about, and adapt the way you do business. We found a lot of American businesses have the similar challenges coming into Europe and wanting to be truly international. I'm keen to hear your thoughts about this in a second. Definitely, you've got more experience than I have here, but from what I've seen, European businesses coming into the US, there's usually a realization point where they figure that even if they're trying to target a relatively niche market in terms of industry, you still potentially have to spend pretty big to reach that niche, and you've really got to come with a plan for it. You know, if you're a European company expanding within Europe, there's the option to be quite incremental and tactical. You know, you go into a new market, you adapt, you solidify, you repeat, you go into another new market. You move into the US, you're suddenly in a single, if fragmented in some ways, a single market that has an economy over 60% larger than the entire EU put together. And that's a challenge for both B2B and B2C companies. You really do need to come with a plan. You need to come with potentially, probably a budget and the resources to action that plan as well. But what are your thoughts, Ed?
I think you need to come with a plan, resources, and a budget, but more importantly, probably a backup plan, right? Because you very quickly find out, oh, wait, maybe that's not what we were thinking. You know, I've told you the story. There's a Finnish company, wanted to come to the US. We've got a budget, we've got a plan, tell us what their objectives are. We go back and tell them, yeah, that's going to be a couple $1 million to do that. What do you mean? We've got $75,000. Every time we do something here in Helsinki, every media outlet shows up. You know, 200 plus media outlets show up. Right, we have 200 media outlets in Houston alone. You really have to account for just the size and scale of this market. And I think a lot of people, you know, just coming over here for a vacation or something like that and understanding, right, we drove around, we saw a lot of it, it's a big country. I don't think you really I don't think a lot of people really understand just how enormous it can be. It can overwhelm you very quickly.
It's interesting. I think conversely, though, the same maybe wrong thinking or possibly even slightly naive thinking comes the other way as well. You know, that benefit in Europe of European companies being able to expand country to country or sub-region by sub-region. And sometimes you see US companies, not just US companies, APAC companies, etc., non-European companies come in and they'll look at, okay, we're going to market to the Nordics. And Nordics as a region, and anyone who understands anything about the countries will tell you they are very individual and should be treated as individuals.
My friends in Finland are different than my friends in Sweden. I know this.
Exactly. And even worse than that, EMEA. I mean, to think that one region that covers Finland to Greece to Saudi Arabia to sub-Saharan Africa is the same region there's a naivety there potentially, and it's learning.
Yeah.
But I think the key for this really is, I mentioned it back at the start, is partnership. You know, having a partner who understands where you're coming from, your company, your brand, your heritage, your uniqueness, the way you do business, but also the market you want to enter. You know, that could be an agency partner, it could be an industry partner, but ideally it's the same partner who understands both. That's, from my experience at least, the way to get a foot up pretty early.
100%. Yep. And I think European countries do it. I think they've recognized this, which is why they go and set up business offices that help facilitate companies coming over to the US. And it's actually quite novel and really great.
So I wanted to talk about data privacy as well when it comes to marketing, because there's significant differences both in terms of law and in terms of culture here in the US compared with back in Europe. GDPR in Europe, everybody knows about it, everybody understands it. And for me, the biggest difference is GDPR is geared towards the right to privacy. That's the language it uses, the consumer's right to privacy. Whereas US laws, there's a lot of talk about data security, there's a lot of talk about privacy of records, but the right to security is very much something that's not in the cultural sphere here. So I know there's some strict laws governing health, finance, federal agencies, etc., but not one specific law that covers everything. And it looks like it's a long way from happening.
It is.
For me,
it's the wild west here.
It's the wild west, exactly. I think maybe we'll come to that in a second. But Americans, for me, since I've been here, have become a lot more acclimatized to what we as Europeans would see as quite invasive marketing across the board. So, I mean, a good example is always when I'm watching sport. Every stat is sponsored by at least one company. Ad breaks seem to be more important than the actual sport itself a lot of the time. It's just something we're not used to in Europe, at all. And that, everything, you get hit with emails, SMS, WhatsApp, physical mail, sometimes all at the same time, to stuff that I'm pretty sure I've never opted into. So, I mean, what do you think, Ed? What are the challenges and what also the opportunities, more to the point, to a European company coming in and having that wild west to compete with or to take advantage of?
Yeah, I think you do have an opportunity to quote unquote take advantage of it, but I would be cautious because it is changing. As a country, we're the wild west, risk, blah 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 blah. All the things that I said before. But as individuals, I think we're pretty much like everybody else, right? I don't really like anybody sharing my information with somebody that I don't know that you're sharing it with. I don't like the 50, spam emails that I get in my inbox every day. We don't like those things. And I do think that those things are going to be changing relatively soon. There's a number of regulations and laws that are being debated currently, more so than just sort of what you see going on in California. These are at the national level.
I think the other thing that is in some ways related is the idea of data sovereignty, which is a big consideration in Europe, more so in some countries than others, but a lot in the EU specifically. A lot of countries put a lot of time and thought into data sovereignty, and companies moving into the US where maybe they've just had European operations in the past really need to think hard and carefully about how they deal with data across borders outside of the EU. And how they communicate that as well, because even at the consumer level, there's a lot of awareness and a lot of potential concern with this data that's perceived to be moving into the US, where maybe the same right to privacy doesn't apply. It's definitely a consideration.
Yeah, for sure.
So B2B e-commerce, I think it's something that's probably already been mentioned today. If not, I'm sure it will be by the end of this event. And it's something I really want to talk about in terms of the predicted growth in the US, the recent growth in the US. And maybe let's start with a few stats. So I know last year, B2B e-commerce sales in Europe were worth around $1.3 trillion and $1.8 trillion here in the US. And the figure's rising again, as it has for the last few years, looking at around $1.8 trillion in Europe and 2.1 in the US. And then by 2027, over $3 trillion worth in the US, which is huge, double what it was a couple of years ago. And the marketplace is huge. It's not equally mature across industries, that's fair to say. But I mean, one of the interesting facts for me is that only 30% of European B2B e-commerce that's done across borders is done across borders that aren't within the European region. And if you couple that with the fact that for the first time ever, there's more B2B marketplaces in the US than there are in Europe, this presents a really interesting opportunity for European companies that want a bigger slice of that global digital sales pie. But what's potentially even more interesting, or at least equally interesting than the growth, is the changing expectation of those B2B buyers. So, looking quickly back to stats, there's a recent Forrester research piece that showed that 70% of business buyers now expect an immediate response to an online question. 74% expect a personalized digital sales and marketing experience across the board. But even more starkly, I think 83% of buyers were dissatisfied in one or more areas with a winning vendor that they went through an online buying experience with. So basically what we're saying is over 3/4 of buyers were dissatisfied, at least partly, with the vendor that they deemed the best of the bunch. So for me, as that expectation gap between B2B and B2C e-commerce buyers continues to close, organizations that don't have digital marketing and sales strategy or really don't have a robust digital marketing and sales strategy are really going to start to struggle. And ultimately, that makes room for players that do have those established strategies to start entering new markets and making headways in those markets. It doesn't happen by magic. Obviously, everything we've talked about so far still needs to be taken into account. You need to adapt the strategy as needed, but I think there's a real opportunity there. What are your thoughts?
Well, I'll see your stat, and I'll do you one better. I think in Europe, what you see typically is the B2B decision maker is, and it's changing, of course, but where typically is older white males and females, primarily males, right? People who are older than 50, getting into 60 years old. The latest survey from Gartner that came out towards the end of last year is in 2022 in the US, 72% of B2B decisions were made by millennials. These are people who are currently somewhere in the age of 22 to 40. These are the people who you're marketing to. Like us 10 years ago. These are the people that you're going to have to be marketing to. And I think we can all understand their methods, their channels, their mode of communication is distinctly different from the 50, 60-year-old European who's running a company. It's fact. And so you need to really start thinking about, if you're coming over here, how are you going to communicate with those folks?
Okay, one final topic that I'd like to potentially talk about here, economic factors, things that are rumbling down the road towards us here in the US at the moment. Yeah. I think expectations have been worse than actual performance over the last few quarters. The economy's not done as badly as maybe predicted, but we are expected to go into recession by midpoint this year. We don't want to end on a negative, so let's maybe talk about the opportunities there as well. Ed. You've lived through this before. I've not been in the US for a recession yet. You have, so what do you reckon? What should we be thinking?
So yeah, I'm not an economist, and people are smarter in finance and numbers. They're going to hear what I'm about to say and go, yeah, he doesn't know what he's talking about. Let's move on to the next speaker. But what I would say is, whether there's a recession or not, I don't know. They've been saying that for a year now, that's going to happen. And the data says the average recession lasts 10 months. And that you don't even know that you're in a recession until you're in like the second quarter of it. So we may be in a recession already. We just don't know it. My point is, I'm going to still do what it is that I'm built to do. I'm going to go find opportunities. I'm going to go find business. I'm still trying to grow my business, our collective business. I think within that, you think about there's some great business and case stories that said during recession, that company excelled because they were well positioned. They had a plan. They weren't overcapitalized or anything along those lines. I think the other bit that is really important to think about is we've done a lot of work globally, but more so in the US, to silo industries, right? So right now, everybody's talking about all the drawdowns and drawbacks in IT and tech. But oil and gas, they can't hire enough people right this minute. So, it's really going to be on an as per basis. And so you just really have to pay attention to that.
So what you're saying is ultimately the savvy marketers are cognizant of their audiences and how it's affecting them. And
correct.
It's an opportunity, and the fundamentals are to double down and really understand how the challenges change during time of recession.
That's right. And, some of my favorite case study is the late recession, the late 70s, early 80s recession in the shoe business. Adidas, Puma, whatever, during that recession, they all cut their marketing budgets by like 50% and more. Nike, they went in and they said, nope, we're going to spend 5 times as much as we did the previous. And look what happened. That was the catalyst. That was the point at time that Nike just sort of went off the charts in the US.
Okay, it's been great chatting with you today, Ed. Thanks again for taking the time to speak to us, using your afternoon up today.
Thanks for having me.
Pleasure. But before we sign off, I've actually got 2 final questions for you. First of all, if you had one piece of advice, overall summary advice for companies coming from Europe to want to do more business in the US, what would that be?
Have a plan. Just have a plan. You need money, you need resources, you need people, but you need a plan, and be thoughtful about it.
Very good. And secondly, and this isn't a loaded question at all, considering where this is going to be broadcast, but you've worked a lot across Europe, across the world. Which is your favorite nationality to work with?
That is a loaded question. Look, I like everybody. It's probably why I've gotten to where it is that I am. But I do have a particular affinity for my friends in Finland, for sure. And I'm not just saying that. I've been there a number of times. They've always been really welcoming to me. I love being there. I was just there in November. So there's a lot to like.
Thank you, Ed, for that definitely unscripted answer. And thank you again. It's been a pleasure talking to you. And thank you, everybody. If anybody's got any questions, we are here on the live feed today. So feel free to offer your thoughts and we'll do what we can to answer them.